Hi, howdy, how you doing? Welcome back to the iCough podcast. That's right, I changed the name. It used to be the iCough Art podcast, the Fart Pod, because I thought that was funny. And I don't think that it's not funny. I just realized that Bobby Duke uses the term fart, F-art. I don't know if he has the same meaning with that terminology as I originally conceived of. Um, but I can't compete with Bobby Duke. So we're just going to call this the iCough podcast. Simplify it, streamline it, reduce, baby. So, today we are going to chat about cannabis and creativity, art and weed. And we talked last time about ayahuasca and art, and my experience with going on a journey with Mama Aya in Ecuador. And today we're going to kind of segue into another plant medicine, and that is the cannabis plant and weed and ganja. These are the names. Pot. That's what people call it. And I'm just going to kind of talk about my experience personally with weed and how it has enhanced my creativity in general, but then also some of the drawbacks of using a psychoactive substance on a regular basis. And we're just going to get right down to it. I kind of wrote some rough notes, a little bit of a not really a script. I just kind of scribbled down my thoughts this morning about what I could talk about. And instead of, making it a little more concise and developing an actual script and proofreading it and even reading through it at all, I'm just going to dive right into this podcast and just talk it out with you because there's not really a whole lot of research that went into it. I'm just explaining my personal experience. So, and plus, I've been dealing with a lot of resistance lately, and if I get too much in the weeds with the prep and the planning for producing content like this, then I am afraid that I will just never get it out to you. So, we're just going to dive in. I started smoking weed when I was 18 years old, after I graduated high school. It was actually between high school and college that I tried it for the first time. I wasn't planning on telling this story, but I think it's funny, and I'm going to tell it. The first time I smoked, it was actually synthetic weed. It wasn't even the real stuff. Because back then, in Missouri, where I live, where I'm from, weed was illegal. It's legal now, medically and recreationally, here in 2024. But I was 18 back in 2011, and it was still very much illegal all across the board back then. And so there were, scientists that came up with synthetic weed. Originally, it was K2, I think was the first synthetic weed. And then after K2 got banned, because they were like, this is basically like weed except worse, they came out with another form called dew. And that's what I smoked for the first time. Now, mind you, before this, I had only broken sober consciousness once in my life. I got drunk on New Year's Eve, senior year of high school. So, probably like 6 months prior to this weed experience. And how it happened was so, like, basically, I was a pretty good kid. I was following the rules. I was never experimenting with drugs. I was not a druggie by any means. I wasn't really even in the party scene. I mean, if I went to a party and there was a dance floor, I would boogie. It's not like I'm against partying and socializing. I was pretty social as a child and in high school, but I just I don't know. I didn't want to get in trouble. I guess I was afraid of my dad. I don't know why I decided to avoid that lifestyle all through high school. No regrets. Um, I think it allowed me to kind of make friends through other values. We're not going to talk about that today. Maybe I'll do an alcohol episode next. Um, First time I tried weed, it was the dew, the synthetic weed, horrible substance. Don't recommend it, and I'm not comparing it to weed, other than the psychological hurdle of like I'm doing this drug, which is supposed to be this other drug, and they are somewhat similar. I mean, it's psychoactive and it kind of affects your brain in similar ways, but I'm only saying this because the dew is more like a chemical based high, and I have a reverence for plant medicine because it's directly derived from nature, and I think that there's some innate wisdom in plant medicines that are kind of, you know, put off to the side whenever you fabricate these synthetic substances. So, anyway, I was getting ready to go on a little day trip excursion to one of my friends' family farms, and we were all loaded up in the car. There was 5 of us. We were getting ready to go to the farm and just have a good day fishing, hanging out outside, barbecuing, stuff like that. And as I get into the car, I think I was sitting in the middle of the back seat, and one of my friends turns around, and as we're driving out of the driveway, he's like, "Hey, so here's the deal, Al. We brought this stuff, and we're all gonna do it. You don't have to, but we're all gonna do it, and it's happening." And I was like, "Well, fuck me. I'm not just gonna sit here and watch you guys get high, and here I am sober." And it was awkward. I was like, they weren't really coercing me, they weren't forcing me or peer pressuring me to do it. They said I didn't have to, but the situation was a little sticky, and it wasn't exactly an easy path for me to maintain my sobriety. And so, I something that also should be mentioned, and I don't want to get like too personal for other people's sake. But if you know me, you'll probably know who I'm talking about. But I was dating a girl at the time, and her sister was actually in rehab, and so that made things a little tricky because it was not only just for my own sake that I was preserving my sobriety, but I also felt a little bit of duty to be a sober person because of my relationship and the circumstances surrounding that. So it was a little bit of a conflict. I didn't really have time to get permission and to avoid any sort of trouble, so I thought about it on the trip to the farm, and as they were doing the deed and getting ready, I was like, this is bullshit. I want to do it too. But I had also heard a rumor, and I don't even know if this is true, but I've always heard that the first time you smoke weed, you don't really get that high. And I think the science behind it, correct me if I'm wrong, if you know about this, leave me a comment. But supposedly, the neurotransmitters in your brain, the cannabinoid receptors, I don't know if those are neurotransmitters or not, but the cannabinoid receptors in your brain take a little bit of building, and so when you do it the first time, it kind of signals those receptors, kind of wakes them up, but they're not exactly ready to accept it and to give you the full effect. So I've always heard that like you don't really get high the first time, you have to get high a second time, and that's when it really hits you. So I told my friend, who was probably the most experienced in this world, to make sure that it counts, if you know what I mean. So he rolled me up a whole joint, and I pretty much took it down single-handedly to myself. The first time ever trying this drug. Smart. And that spiraled into a wild experience. It was quite literally a trip. It was a psychedelic experience. I don't know how else to say it. I thought my shoes were a car. I thought I was in a video game that I had to complete. I had to like go back in time and live my whole life over again and complete it like a video game in order to get back to present reality. I kind of went to hell for a second. I don't want to say I blacked out, but I definitely was in another state of mind and not super aware of my physical surroundings. I don't know how long that lasted, but I eventually came out of that state and kind of talked myself into it. And from then on, I had actually a pretty lovely experience. I kind of overcame that demon, I guess, and was able to gain a little bit more sane peace of mind, and had actually kind of a profound experience. I got really deep and spiritual and had a little bit of an enlightening experience. So that was a caveat, a silver lining, I guess. It sounds like a negative experience at first, and it was. Um, but after that, I was certainly curious about consciousness in a way that I had never been before. I have always been a very conscientious person. I have been reading mind over matter content since I was probably 13, 14, and very aware of like meditation and prayer and how the mind can affect the body, and just constantly evaluating my state of mind and my consciousness and my mood, and it wasn't something that was unfamiliar for me. So, but this experience was kind of like that on steroids. It was kind of opening my eyes and my mind to alternate thought patterns, alternate consciousness and states of mind. Certainly, it just pushed me out of my comfort zone. It pushed me out of sobriety to the extent that I think I understood what sobriety actually was. It put that into context. And so, anyway, in general, I increased my curiosity of consciousness and kind of thought to myself, like, I'm not really trying to do this anytime soon again. That was definitely scary and not something that I really could imagine myself doing on any sort of regular basis, but I certainly had that seed planted of like, I wouldn't mind experimenting and doing something like this again sometime. So fast forward to college. Several months go by. I'm in college. I make some new friends on my dorm floor, and I overhear this one kid talking about weed, and I was like, oh, I've had an experience with that. And I started talking to him about it, and he was in my group of friends that me and my roommate were hanging out with, and eventually it just like the opportunity arose again, and we ended up getting high, and that was real weed, and it was a different experience. I didn't have that negative freak out anxiety attack. It was mostly very joyful. It was very positive. I remember just laughing a ton. And the first few experiences with marijuana for me were definitely the most wild. Out of my whole life of smoking weed since then, these were definitely the most impactful times. Was the first like handful of times that I got high. And I think it's just because I have been so used to living my life sober that it was so different and wild and fun and exciting. So anyway, we had such a good time experimenting with this substance, and a lot of the other friends in the group were kind of new to this as well, and we kind of eased into it. We would do it maybe once every couple of weeks. It was a very special occasion. It wasn't like anything habitual. And those first, couple months of experimenting with each other, we would just go on a roadie because you couldn't smoke in the dorms, obviously. And this is very dangerous. I don't condone this at all. Driving while intoxicated on anything is not cool. It's not just drinking. Driving while stoned is not cool. But that was what we had to basically... The theory was if you're in the car and you're smoking a joint, even if you get pulled over by a cop, you can just get rid of it. You can swallow it. It might smell, but you won't have anything on you. So if you're smoking in a car in a parking lot, for instance, and not driving, then the cop could just roll up and bust you, and you'd have nowhere to go. You wouldn't have the time that it takes to pull over. This is the theory. I'm not saying this is a good idea. Don't do this, kids. This is just what we did for years, and we are alive. So not that means that it's okay. I don't even know why I'm explaining this. I'm just giving you context. Because we would go out on roadies. We call them roadies. And we would come back to the dorms and just have our snacks. We would just eat tasty, yummy junk food and play video games and just have some really interesting conversations and tons of laughter. Um, so that was really fun. Weed is really effective with shifting your perspective. That was a rhyme. And I think that it really kind of opens the mind in a way that kind of innately leads to more creative thinking. So we had really good conversations, and eventually, I mean, it also increases pleasure. I just said, like, food tastes better, music sounds more interesting, the environment around you looks cooler. It's just time gets kind of warped. I remember the first time I got stoned with my friends in the dorm, time was just like so crazy how slow it was passing. I was like, guys, it's only been 30 minutes since the last time I told you the time. And it was just like blowing my mind, how, the relativity of time and how that was affected by this new substance. Um, it was really a great way to connect and to make these friendships. Um, I think that my friends in college that I made that freshman year, I mean, we were friends throughout college, and it's a lot to do because we have similar like ways of thinking and whatever. But we were really stoner buddies. We had a good time connecting over this substance, and it's not like it was just the substance, but it certainly helped. So, you know, I think it's common knowledge that alcohol is actually the social enhancement drug of choice for most people. And I think there's validity to that. It lowers your inhibition, it allows you to be kind of free and take risks and put yourself out there a little bit. Um, but I think that weed does something similar because it brings you together in a more intimate way. Um, I think it could, if taken in the wrong context or in the wrong amount, increase anxiety and fear and make you not want to talk to people. But in the right setting, in an intimate setting, in a safe setting, it can enhance your ability to connect because I think it makes you more vulnerable. I think it kind of opens your heart a little bit and it makes you a little bit more willing and open to express yourself and to accept others. And I think that's kind of a magical thing. It kind of humbles you a little bit. Like a little bit of fear could be could be good because it kind of puts you in your place and it knocks you down a peg. It kind of releases your ego a little bit. Weed is exceptional at that. Whereas alcohol probably does the worst. It probably bolsters your ego and makes you do stupid shit. I know that's what it does for me. This is not a podcast about alcohol. Let's stay focused. Um, so, getting stoned and chilling in the dorms in college was like the highlight of my college days, I have to say. There wasn't really anything quite like it, especially in the early days when I was first experimenting with this drug. And it was in those days that I started my first spontaneous drawing sketchbook. So, if you're familiar with my content and my channel, you know that I do daily drawings and I just sit down and I draw the first thing that comes to my head. There's not a lot of planning that goes into it. I just draw something. A lot of times it'll start with just like random squiggles and I'll turn it into a face or a tree or something. And those first stoner days in the dorms when we would come back and chill after the roadie and everybody was chilling and talking and whatever, I would get out my sketchbook and I would just grab the utensil that was closest to me, and that happened to be a Sharpie. And so I first started just drawing spontaneous characters and images with a Sharpie in this tiny little sketchbook. It was like a 4x6 sketchbook, about the same size as the one I draw in now. It might be even a little bit smaller. And this was kind of like a step outside of what I normally done for art. So up until this point, my art was definitely rooted in realism. Like most of my art was sketching from life or referencing a photo and just copying what I see in front of me basically and creating something that already existed. So this was like a new thing for me to just spontaneously draw something from my head. Um, and just get really weird with it. And so I think that this is probably the most profound aspect that cannabis has had in my life, was it kind of opened up the door for a new avenue of creativity within my mind. And I just started getting a lot more creative and loose and exploring my stylistic way of drawing. This was kind of like the birth of my more stylistic work that you probably see today. This was like the very beginning. It was pretty rough. It wasn't good. I'm not saying that like weed made me good. It just kind of like was almost like a renaissance for me in a way. And around that time, I also was beginning to take painting classes, like in school, because I studied art. I went to a liberal arts school. It wasn't an art school, um, but I studied fine arts, and my major was painting. So around the same time I started smoking weed, freshman year, I was in a design class and I did my first painting project with acrylic paints since high school. And I did this like really weird self portrait, and it was like super fun. And I talked to a current painting major, like a senior that year, and they told me that I was doing a good job, and they said that they were a painting major, and they kind of told me about the classes. And I was like, this is totally my vibe. I think I'm going to pursue painting. So I started taking painting classes around the same time that I was doing these new, spontaneous, really weird, stylistic drawings while stoned. And so I actually just started turning those drawings into paintings, very similar to my process now. And they were really cool. They got a lot of compliments and they were received really well by my peers. It was giving me some attention from some of the older students, and I was having fun, most importantly. I hadn't really had that much fun when I was, painting pet portraits and deceased loved one portraits, which were my typical content before that. So it was really exciting. These random doodles turning into paintings. The doodles were really rough. I was drawing with Sharpie, so they're like bold and kind of crude. But when I translated them into paintings, I was able to make them more in depth, and I was kind of able to apply more of my skills from realism with texture, lighting, form, and implement that into my rough Sharpie doodles. And that was a really cool kind of formula that I was developing at that time. So, yeah, I don't think I really realized it at the time. I was just kind of having fun and doodling, which was really organic, but this would develop into the uniqueness of my style as I see it today. I was experiencing new waves of inspiration, basically. Since I was having more fun than I ever had with drawing and painting, I was inspired to do it, to kind of push that and to draw those goofy things more. And that was super exciting. Another benefit other than creativity, so I've kind of talked about like how weed has increased my capacity for creativity. One of the other benefits, which is more physical, is endurance. I noticed that I was able to paint for several hours at a time, because if I were to get fatigued or tired physically or mentally, psychologically, in the painting process, I could just go rip a bowl and refresh my mindset. It kind of would reset my mind. So if I was like bored on the project and just like I've been doing it for a long time and just like mentally fatigued, you kind of reset that. And also, cannabis has some pain relieving qualities that were good for, if I'm spending hours at a time kind of hunched over the easel, over a canvas and painting, and just really tight. Painting, you get pretty tight when you're trying to hold your hand steady and move the brush, and it's kind of a pain on your neck and in your shoulder, and you're just really tight. So it helped with that, which was just another bonus. One of the reasons I like weed so much is because it has just myriad of benefits that all kind of like play into each other And it's part of the magic of plant medicine, for sure. Um, so, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, okay. So, these are the benefits. I've talked about how it kind of was like a revolution for my art when I first started doing it, but it didn't take long for these perks, these benefits to turn into negative effects. Let me explain. I do believe that the best medicines can become poison if they are overused and abused. So that's my hot take. And I think I am an example of that, particularly with weed. So after like a couple years of using weed as a tool for creative activities, it started to morph into a crutch, and not just for my art making process, right? Like I was using it to do creative things, but I was also using it in everyday life. By my junior year, I was smoking pretty much every day. I was living in a house off campus now with these stoner friends that I had been hanging out with for the first 2 years in the dorms. And so we didn't have hardly any friction between getting high. Before we had to like plan ahead. We can only do it like once in the night when everybody was free. We did wait till everybody was available. Now it was like I could just rip a bong in my living room, and it was way too easy. And then I was surrounded by all my friends that liked to do that with me. So like anytime anybody else was doing it, it was just giving me a segue to do it myself. And I'm not blaming anybody for my own habits. I still love these guys. It's not like a judgment thing. I'm just saying um, it was too easy. There was no friction involved. So because of that, I just became a full-on stoner and was just indulging whenever I wanted to. Nobody was telling me not to. And don't get me wrong, I was still accomplishing everything I needed to. Like it wasn't like I was just shirking all responsibility. I had perfect attendance in most of my classes. I rarely missed class ever throughout my whole school career, like grade school through high school. I just didn't miss class. For me, that's like the easiest part is just showing up. And since it's like a routine and a schedule, for me, it has never been a problem for me to show up to class, even in college when nobody was forcing me to do it. I just don't like doing work outside of class. And I had already planned that that's when the class is for that day on any given schedule. So it was impossible to schedule anything else. So I just would go by my schedule. I don't know why. It was just really easy for me to do. So even when I was smoking a bunch of weed and it was like my main objective outside of school, I was still showing up to class, still getting my assignments done. Yeah, if you don't go to class, then you have to do more work outside of school, and I was not about that. So I would try and get as much as I could done in class, and just try and like binge my homework and binge papers and assignments and stuff like that, so that I could have all my free time to get high and have fun and play video games and all that jazz. So, you know, I do want to say that I was completing all my assignments, but I was probably doing the bare minimum and relying on my talents, especially in art classes. Because liberal arts school, we had to take a ton of, like, way more gen eds than a normal university would require. Like, we had to take a ton of extracurricular classes that were not applied to our major. So if you know about liberal arts school, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I was definitely relying on my talents, my abilities that I already had, which were probably above average in my art classes, and I was just getting the bare minimum done. Like if I had a painting assignment due next Tuesday, I would wait until Monday and just spend all of Monday afternoon and evening and stay up late trying to get that painting done. And I would just like binge it, like I said. And I would use weed in order to do that. But I certainly was not pushing my abilities and trying to develop skills in the way that I am now today when I've taken the responsibility to pursue this as my career. Um, And I'm not blaming all this on weed. I already suffered from perfectionism and procrastination and a lack of motivation and all that. But weed definitely allowed me to ignore some deeper psychological issues and to cover up my lack of meaning and purpose. And I'm aware of that now. I wasn't aware of it then. I was just doing it. If I was just uncomfortable or bored, I would just smoke weed. And it was good at that. It was good at covering that up and fixing that. What I've learned since is that you have to find meaning in life. You have to give yourself purpose. Whether you find that exogenously or you develop within yourselves a sense of meaning, that is a non-negotiable for life. You will not find joy outside of that path. I didn't know that back then. I was probably a little bit more external locus of control and would just, I don't know, claim whatever illness. And I don't want to say that. I think I've been pretty internally motivated throughout my life, but I just would find any excuse I possibly could and rest on it. So, you know, not having that meaning, whenever you're put in a difficult situation and when you're put to the test of, you know, you got to make something happen and you got to do something, then I would just default to doing nothing and killing time. So I would go to class, get all my work done, get it out of the way, all my obligations, social obligations, whatever. And then as soon as I could, every day, I would go home and I would get stoned. And it was kind of like my default, if you will. So the thing about that is, and the reason that I think that like chronic use is problematic is, even if you think it is a medicine and it's helping you with things, the more you use it, the more your body is going to get used to it. And that was definitely happening for me. So the drug I was becoming reliant on using this drug, and I was relying on it to create, and it was simultaneously not having the effect that I wanted it to. Like, the more I used it, the less it was actually effective. That's just how it goes. That's called tolerance. So this relationship with weed continued all throughout college and into my adulthood. And if you're sitting here listening to this and you're wondering when I'm going to relieve the tension of like the negative aspects and kind of bring this home and tell you my moral of the story and the lesson, I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm still very much trying to balance this relationship even today. And it is a balance. I think I'm in a way better place than I was 10 years ago when I was in college, for sure. I have a way healthier relationship with weed. I have way more reverence for it. I definitely, most of the time, use it as a tool for either creativity or socialization. And I've taken it upon myself to do kind of regular sobriety breaks. I'm actually on a sobriety break right now. I haven't smoked weed for almost 2 months. And, you know, I hate this argument. It's mostly an excuse, but it is true to some extent that I could be doing a lot worse things. So if you're like judging me, you're like, dude, you're a grown adult. Why are you smoking weed? Like, those college days are over. I will just say, like, it's better than alcohol. I think for me, that's objective. It's not the same for everybody. The reason why weed is so tricky and why it becomes so easy to chronically use is because the negative side effects are not as immediate as something like alcohol or even like sugar. Especially other like hardcore drugs. It's pretty gentle on the body. You can get away with smoking it every day because you can function pretty well. I mean, I've painted dozens of murals stoned. Climbing up and down ladders, getting on boom lifts. That's not safe. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying that you can function to a pretty decent degree, especially if you're used to it. while you're under the influence of that substance. And you can't really say that about a lot of other drugs. Um, and this is not my excuse to do it. I'm still saying you should be cognizant and aware of your use and your relationship to the drug. I'm not even trying to say that. I'm not trying to preach. I'm just telling you my experience, and maybe you can learn from it. Okay? That's the motive of this whole podcast. I'm just explaining how it has increased my creativity, and it has really developed my art skills, my style. I literally don't think I would be here talking to you today about my art and having pursued this as a profession if I hadn't experimented with this drug. I'm not crediting marijuana for all my hard work and for my uniqueness and my style and my innate abilities and all of that. But it's definitely part of the journey, and you couldn't write my story without it. Okay? So, anyway, I'm becoming more conscious about my use and my relationship with weed nowadays, and I have come to realize that it is about balance. I am taking a sobriety break now. I took a sobriety break last year. I didn't smoke for like the first 6 months of 2023 while I was in Ecuador, and then a few months after returning. And I did that because I think I was getting carried away. I think I was realizing that it was affecting my mood cycles. I was using it to run away from some issues. And so I took that trip to kind of take life to the face and sober up a little bit. It was easy to leave the country and lose all my connections and not have a legal access to weed any longer, and it was just really easy to not do it. So I was using that and leveraging that inconvenience and putting that friction in between me and my habit. And it was pretty easy to do. I don't want to say it was easy. I definitely went through some mood swings, and it was not, like, it took some adjusting, but it made the temptation to smoke almost non-existent. I still had the urge, but I didn't have the temptation because it wasn't realistic. I'm sure I could have found some weed in Ecuador. That probably wasn't hard to do. I'm sure it was around. I just didn't go looking for it because I was outside of my comfort zone already, and I don't know. It was a good opportunity. But then when I came back, I stayed sober for a while, and then I had a really good relationship with weed for the rest of 2023. And I really wasn't abusing it, I wouldn't say. I was doing it like maybe once, twice a week, doing it right before I painted or when I met up with friends, and that's it. I even had a rule of like I'm not going to ever do it 2 days in a row. So I'd do it like every other day type of thing. And that helped. That was a good rule. And I think I want to go back to that after this sobriety break. And what changed was we bought this duplex, and I started doing manual labor every day during the renovation process. And I just kind of slipped back into the daily habit. You remember when I was talking about endurance? That is also effective when doing monotonous manual labor. Again, I don't recommend being intoxicated while operating power tools. But when I was doing processes, especially like painting the house or just like cleaning or sanding or ripping out staples from the floor, stuff like that, it was like the dead of winter when I was doing that renovation, so I was just kind of like on repeat, working every single day for 10 hours a day, every day of the week, no days off. And so I was absolutely self-medicating with weed, and it got out of control pretty fast. Still, everything that I said before applies. It's not the worst thing in the world. Better than me drinking on the job, hands down. And I've been sober off of alcohol for 2.5 years plus, with no real intention of getting back on that wagon anytime soon for various reasons. Maybe I'll talk about that later. But yeah, I got back on the wagon of weed when I was doing that renovation process, and that kind of lasted all through the year up until about a month ago. I was basically using almost on a daily basis. And I finally just decided to stop. And I did a similar thing with the sobriety break. I had my stash of weed, and I just decided, okay, I'm not going to buy any more. I'm just going to smoke what I got. Once that's gone, I'm sober. And so, yeah, it's been almost 2 months. I don't think I'm going to go a full 6 months this time around. Maybe I'll do that in the future, do a longer break. But for now, I'm just going to do like a couple months. 2 weeks from now, I'm going on a lake weekend trip with those same friends that coerced me way back when. Um, and I do want to be able to enjoy that substance with that group of friends in that intimate setting. It's a good place to do it. It's kind of a retreat where we all kind of indulge in some sins, and I'm not indulging in the other sins that everybody else is going to be doing. You know what I mean? I won't be drinking, they will. I won't even be eating sugar. They'll be eating lots of yummy snacks. I haven't been eating sugar really for most of the last couple years as well. And so I figured it's like my one thing that I can do. At least I can have some weed to smoke. I get this little tincture um, squeeze stuff that I'll just like put into um, a tonic water and kind of it's like a mocktail, except it is like a cocktail. It's just with weed, THC. So it's kind of like I am drinking with them, and it makes me feel less left out, and it's a pretty good happy medium, I think, for me. So taking regular sobriety breaks. My goal for this after that weekend is to get back to that kind of guideline of like not smoking consecutive days in a row, trying to keep it a reverent practice and use it for the benefits that it serves for. Um, being more reverent, being more ceremonial with my use, and making sure that I'm using it to get creative and to enhance that experience and not using it as a crutch, using it to connect with friends, doing it more on special occasions, and really reducing the amount that I consume as well, keeping my tolerance low so that it can be effective when I want to use it as the tool that it is. So, what else do I have to say? I think that's it. Let me know what you think. Was this helpful? Was this interesting at all? Was this annoying? Do you think I'm an addict? Do you think that my use is reasonable? What say you? Do you smoke weed? Do you like plant medicines? Where are you on your journey with your consciousness? Please let me know in the comments below. I thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.